in 2020 is Alex Ruff, our MP for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. Alex, welcome. Good to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me, David.
Now, I have to say, we're approaching the end of 2020, and I'm sure you, just like everybody else, will be glad to say good riddance to 2020.
Yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting year, but for sure, I think everybody's looking forward to 2020 and a little bit of optimism.
I think so. Now, the House has risen for its holiday break, so you're attending to other matters. When will the House be back?
That's a great question. I think we actually could be back next week, but at the same time, who knows? And why I say that is the Bill C7, Medical Assistance in Dying, is now in front of the Senate. They are hopefully finishing debate today on, I think, second reading. And if that passes, it will go to committee within their House, as they call it, or within within the Senate. And providing that they get through that sooner than later, I foresee that the amendments coming back, or potentially a complete rejection of the bill by the Senate. And if that happens, and the Quebec Superior Court doesn't provide the extension that the government's asked for, there may be desire to try to get that dealt with as expediently as possible. So that's up to the federal government to decide. But if not, the House is not scheduled to come back and start sitting again until the 25th of January.
Well, let's go into the bill on medical assistance in dying, because I think that's a topic of deep concern to all Canadians, a deep interest to all Canadians. Just to go back here, the House voted in favor of the legislation, although I noted that you and your party voted against it. Is that right?
Well, not the party. Our party, the Conservative Party of Canada, is one of the few parties, if not the only party left in federal government that actually allows a free vote. There was, I guess you could say, within the government ranks or within the Liberal Party ranks, they did have one of their lone physician vote against the bill, and they had a couple other MPs that abstained from voting. However, within our party, the majority of MPs within the Conservative Party did vote against it. And it's not necessarily because they have any issues with medical assistance in dying. I don't hide the fact that I actually have no problem myself personally with the concept, but I do have a problem with bad legislation and poorly written legislation. And when we've heard from all sorts of witnesses on this issue from both sides of the political spectrum, some that feel that it's not constitutional, it doesn't go far enough to advance medical assistance in dying and the availability of it, to others on the other side, especially those that are really heart-wrenching, that represent the disabled community and are most vulnerable, and feel that the legislation as it's currently drafted is actually putting them at greater risk, and most of the safeguards have been removed with the latest bill. So I voted for the bill at second reading to go to committee for study and for amendments, hoping to see some of those amendments that we had put forth included. Unfortunately, it did not get accepted at committee. The bill was passed back for report stage, which I voted against it, and at final reading. But as you correctly said, the bill was passed by the House. It did receive the majority of support from MPs in the House, went to the Senate, and now they have to follow the same process. So it'll be interesting to see what the senators decide. If they don't accept it, if they push it, if either reject the bill or they ask for amendments, it then comes back to the House, where we will vote on it again. I'm not completely sure if we get the opportunity to debate it again, or whether or not we just vote on it, but I think there will be some level of debate included. And then from there, if we accept their amendments, or not, it goes back to the Senate. Now, traditionally, the senators are, or the Senate will just accept it, regardless of whatever the House does, is sort of being representative or acknowledging, I guess, that we are the members of Parliament and the House of Commons are the people that have been elected, not appointed by Canadians. So therefore, we should have the final say. However, at the same time, I think why you see a lot of division, or not division, but unhappiness with this bill from all sides of the political spectrum of interest in the independent senators group is because this is not a partisan bill. This has nothing to do with political parties. This is actually to do about a very sensitive issue that people have concerns about. And so I think you're going to see them pushing back, those that were even appointed by this prime minister and under this government, that they don't necessarily agree with this, because this isn't something about party politics. This is very much about legislation and good legislation and making sure that it's there. So we'll see how it goes. And I can speak honestly that for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound, this is about a 50-50 split from feedback that I personally received. It's sort of gone in waves at different times over the last year and a bit, but this is a subject that is obviously dear and important to so many different Canadians. So it's important that we try to get it as right as possible, but there's a parliamentary review that was supposed to start taking place. I think that will continue on next year, regardless of where this piece of legislation ends up, and we will continue to debate it, because this is arguably the most important bill that the House, that, you know, since my short time in federal politics, that's been brought forward, because this is a bill that does have life and death implications. So it's very important that we do our best to bring forth the best legislation possible.
You mentioned that the extension of the time for the law to be brought forward because of a decision by the Quebec courts. And as I understand it, the Quebec courts, the original bill was challenged, and the Quebec court said, okay, we agree that it needs to be changed, and you've got a year to do it. And so the government is under, I won't say under the gun, but certainly under significant pressure to comply with a court order. And so this is the result. And are you suggesting it's possible the Quebec government may, or the Quebec court may allow them a little extra time to get the legislation tidied up?
I fully anticipate that they will. They've actually given 2 extensions already, so the government hasn't done this. And we're up against this tight timeline, unfortunately, because this wasn't the priority piece of legislation brought forward when the Prime Minister decided to shut Parliament down for 6 weeks. It reset all the legislation, which then restarted the clock and the debate on this bill, and then it was Bill C7. Why wasn't it Bill C2? The government, waited and sort of took their time to bring this forward. And the other issue that they could have done, it's, surprisingly enough, they've appealed, and most governments do at the federal level, anything that a lower court decides will automatically appeal it to the Supreme Court. And for some reason, they chose not to do this in this case, which would have actually allowed the federal government and allowed the federal level of, in the federal courts to make a ruling on this versus just one province. Because the risk is, even if they don't grant the extension, it's not like it's going to change. MAID is still going to exist across Canada. What will be complicating the issue is Quebec will have one set of rules, whereas the rest of Canada will have another set of rules.
Right. It's going to be an interesting conversation ongoing, certainly. I know that this has caused a conversation, I won't say a lot of upheaval, but certainly conversation among people that it's something we've got to, as you say, get it right to the best of our ability. And I heard you say that there will be ongoing hearings, ongoing conversation in the House about this issue. Is that right? It's not. I mean, once the bill is passed, it's not going to be a fait accompli. It'll simply be the law of the land and how it will be practiced. But the issue will have continued discussion.
Well, yes. When the bill was originally passed in 2016, there was a mandatory parliamentary review after 5 years. So my understanding, that review is still slated to go forward in this coming year from a parliamentary perspective, although interesting enough, I think they've removed that requirement going forward past, within the new legislation. But again, I do not profess to understand every sub-paragraph of every piece of legislation that comes forward. Some are easier than others and shorter than others, but I don't sit on the Justice Committee, which has had to study this bill clause by clause. But my understanding, when I asked that question of just some of the staff, that sort of requirement potentially going forward will no longer happen. However, I do know, or at least what I've read, is that it is supposed to happen as part of the procedure that was dictated when the first bill was passed in 2016.
And I think what you're also outlining, if I may add, Alex, is that you're actually outlining the process here, the way Canadian Parliament actually works. We like to think of it as the House of Commons as the be-all and end-all, but no, the Senate has a very important role to play. They call it the chamber of sober second thought, but they have the right to weigh in, and it gets sent back, but it's still a piece from royal assent, but it's something that we have to remember, that we have two chambers that get a kick at the cat, so to speak, and it's just part of our democratic process in this country.
Absolutely.
Now, it's also most interesting to, how shall I say it, see the way this is playing out again. In some ways it was a bit of a rehash, but on the other hand, I think there are still some serious issues which have to be addressed. Have you any inkling of what the Senate will put or change in the bill?
I don't know. Obviously, I'm not in the Senate, and I'm not tracking, and I don't have the time to be watching their debates that have been ongoing. I think they did 7 hours yesterday alone on this. But I think it's actually a split thought. As I mentioned, there's a chunk of the senators that feel the piece of legislation is going to be challenged constitutionally, and therefore because it doesn't go far enough, and to allow sort of people, especially when it comes to around, mental health or depression, and whether they should be eligible or not to apply. And then at the same time, as I said, that I think out 81 of the witnesses or something that the Senate brought forward in the pre-study committee all spoke against the bill. So I think the biggest piece, at least I think I can safely say, that for the conservative appointed senators, their biggest concerns are really around the safeguards and the removal of the 10-day waiting period. And for the new window coming forward, I think there's a 90-day sort of reflection period that they're proposing needs to be 120. And that's really tied to a lot of the services available, due to challenges with our healthcare system and support system across the country, that it takes that long to get there. And especially if it's an early diagnosis, when somebody's been, diagnosed with something that potentially has, that does have terminal consequences, their emotions, their mental health, depression is a huge challenge. And I think there's just a desire from a lot of Canadians that think that we should be addressing palliative care and providing more support to palliative care across this country, so that people have real choice, that they don't feel that they're a burden on their families or their loved ones or the system. And I think that's where this gets so tricky in some ways, that it's a bit of a catch-all, that it's not just one simple thing. And unfortunately, some people look at it and they're concerned about their one aspect of it and what their own personal belief is. And at the same time, there's multiple aspects and factors that we need to consider and try to put in place. So it's hard to get that all-encompassing solution right off the get-go.
We could say this is neither a red nor a blue issue, to use the traditional colors, but one that has many, many shades of gray.
You're 100% right there. This is, as I said, this is one of those issues that isn't about parties or politics. It's about different personal sort of beliefs, aspects, and just really, as I mentioned, I just want to be bringing forth good legislation, and that's where I stand on this.
I would suggest, Alex, this is probably one of the issues where MPs actually excel. I recall the capital punishment debates of the 1980s, and did receive a couple of calls from MPs asking my opinion because of my position in the community. And what was fascinating is that they really were struggling, and that's a good thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. It's a good thing, because as we work with these important decisions, they kind of put all of our life into perspective. kind of like COVID-19, which is what I wanted to talk to you next about, because that has dominated the agenda of the House and of this country for the last 10 months. Again, I was reading your speech, and you said that if you were still in the forces, you'd be a very busy man.
Yeah, if I was in that former job, yes, when I was the deputy director in charge of planning all Canadian Forces operations, both overseas and domestically, I am sure that those at the Canadian Joint Operations Command, and if I was in that position that I was in from 2014 to 2016, there'd be some long hours working on supporting PHAC in this case, and
the
General
Public Health
Fortin.
Agency of Canada.
Yeah, the Public Health Agency of Canada, with General Fortin, who has been selected by the government to be the Vice President of Operations and Logistics for that task force. And they couldn't have chosen a better general. I had the privilege I've had the privilege of knowing General Fortin for many years, but we worked very closely together as he stood up the NATO training mission in Iraq. So literally the last thing I did in uniform was help support that mission from a coalition perspective, wearing my coalition hat within the ministerial liaison team, because that NATO mission in Iraq actually ended up taking over a good chunk of what we were doing within the ministerial liaison team in support of the Iraqi Ministry of Defense. We still held the sort of the lead for development and training of their Ministry of Interior, so their police forces, etc. But what NATO was coming in to take the lead on was the defense side of the house. So I was there's myself, an Australian colonel, a New Zealand colonel, and an American lieutenant commander that we all actually went to Naples, Italy, partway through the tour for a few days to brief General Fortin as he was just standing the mission up. And so it was kind of interesting, a unique experience that I count myself lucky to have had that opportunity to be involved. But bottom line, General Fortin's a phenomenal leader, and I think they chose very wisely in selecting him to help put the planning and logistical support behind the vaccine distribution as it goes forward.
Now, it's a little out of your line, but I also see that General Hillier, retired General Hillier, is also with the Ontario government, and I thought it fascinating that they've called on both officers, or actually General Fortin is active, but the retired General Hillier to kind of run the operation or support the operation and be the public face of the operation for distribution here in Ontario.
I think another brilliant choice. Nobody will question how charismatic and how much General Hillier did for the Canadian Armed Forces in his tenure as the Chief of Defence Staff. So Premier Ford doesn't have the same opportunity that the Prime Minister has, that he can't just pick and task the Canadian Armed Forces to do something or to supply soldiers. He has to actually ask for that through request for assistance to the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, who then would ask to the Minister of National Defence, and they'd get who they got. Whereas by going the retired route and selecting a phenomenal leader in General Hillier, it obviously gives the Premier more freedom and more control to some extent, but at the same time, he couldn't have picked another or a better option, I think, out of retired generals. And it's great because it'll allow that, it demonstrates the experience, the training, and the background of our Canadian Armed Forces members to help Canadians and to definitely help with this distribution plan.
I've heard it said that the real secret to a good army is not the weapons that it has, but the logistics that it has to supply the people who are on the front line. And it sounds like we've got a pretty good team in place.
No, absolutely. You're not far off. Those like myself that was in the combat arms, or when you're doing the frontline stuff, those are who you need to sort of win the short enclosed battles. But wars are won through really long-term strategy, and ultimately most wars are determined by the logistical support. So you still need those operators, and in my biased opinion as a former operator, to sort of drive the boat. But you need those, but it's about driving the logistical chains, the supply chains, behind the scenes that actually determine the ultimate outcomes in many conflicts. But it's no different in this case. This is really all about the logistical supports in order to deliver these complicated vaccines, especially the initial vaccine from Pfizer that requires this cold storage. And I'll take this opportunity to give a shout out to Dr. Era and the Grey Bruce Health Unit and everything that they're doing. I know they've been working very closely, have made their own pitch to the province on how Grey Bruce can take a lead in the vaccine distribution, and demonstrating that he's put together a phenomenal plan already for our local ability to support it, and great support from local industry and businesses like Chapman's that have the refrigeration storage capacity to assist with this. So again, I just think this is a great example. Despite the terrible situation the pandemic's put many Canadians in, and especially the impact on small businesses at the same time, it has given the opportunity for so much collaboration and working together of all levels of government, but small businesses to step to the forefront as well. And kudos to everybody.
Yes, indeed. It's we're very fortunate here in Grey Bruce, where we've got the top-notch health unit. We've got corporations like Chapman's who are stepping up to saying, okay, we can do this. And then we've got Bruce Power, who has also stepped up and said, we can not only do this, but we can help fund this or that. And I know that I just read this morning of another grant of money that I think it's maybe actually federal money that has flowed through the United Way of Bruce Grey to four or five organizations to provide needed services in the midst of this very demanding pandemic time. What's it like in Ottawa right now? Ottawa was a hotspot. Has that kind of cooled out a bit, or are you still being required to be even more closely monitoring of your own selves than you were before?
Well, I can't really speak to the Ottawa situation writ large. My behavior whenever I'm in Ottawa hasn't really changed much. It's a pretty stay at home or go into the house and work from the office. My own staffer that works full time has been working from home since March. That's in the Hill office, and so it's very much a period of sort of almost isolation. You're either in the office or you're in the house, and it hasn't really changed a whole lot. I think Ottawa, from my understanding of listening to the news and stuff, is that has done a pretty good job. They did sort of peak a little bit there, I think, a few weeks ago, but have managed to sort of get things under control and not indicating the same number of cases, et cetera, that obviously Toronto and the Peel area have been struggling with as case counts continue to rise. So hopefully Ottawa gets the situation or has the situation somewhat under control, and hopefully it'll continue to trend downwards.
Yes, let's hope so for all of us, indeed. I noticed that in one of the speeches, or a very brief speech that you gave in the House, you spoke in response to a petition that came forward about the Uyghurs. And what was that about?
So that's on behalf of the Uyghur, minority population in China. It wasn't actually constituents. I did not authorize one of those petitions, but I have tabled them. A couple of them now on that same issue, and it just speaks to what the communist regime is doing in China against a number of minority populations, but in particular Uyghurs, where they're basically being forced either into almost the equivalent of concentration camps and being improperly treated. And in some cases, it's arguably with some of the evidence that has gone out there, whether or not genocide's occurring as well. So it's just it's speaking out in that, and it's actually a number of Canadians across the country have signed multiple petitions. Like I think there's likely, I wouldn't be shocked to see if there was 100 of these petitions that have now been tabled in the House in the last number of months by a number of MPs across all parties, calling upon the government to not only recognize the terrible situation that's ongoing in China against the Uyghur population, but to call upon Magnitsky sanctions, which the government does have the power to do, to sanction Chinese officials that are complicit, basically, in allowing this ongoing atrocity against the Uyghurs.
Sure, and certainly the situation with the Uyghurs has grabbed a lot of attention, both in Canada and around the world. And it's not a simple issue, but it is an ongoing issue. And we can just talk briefly about the petition process because I think people forget that we do have a way of expressing ourselves to the House through the use of petition, but it's a very structured format, is it not?
Yeah, it is. Any Canadian can go on. If you just go to ourcommons.ca, you can just click on the petitions tab. That's I don't know if it's up on one of the top ones, but I think you click under parliamentary work or something, you can click on petitions, and it explains the process, whether or not you want to do it electronically or in writing. A hard copy, I believe you need 25 signatures for a hard copy petition to be to go forward. Or to be tabled, as it's called, or I think 500 for electronic ones. And but again, it's interesting to note. I mean, there's been some interesting debate and discussions and media coverage on different petitions, obviously across the country. One thing that's important for people to understand is just because an MP authorized the publication of a petition doesn't mean they agree with it at all, or in the least bit, or that they're sponsoring it. The word sponsors a petition comes out all the time, and I've yet to see it actually written anywhere within the House procedures. The proper terminology is authorized the publication of it. I think it's safe to say an MP has sponsored it if they've come out publicly or on social media or something that have said that they support it. Then you could arguably debate that they do sponsor the contents of the petition itself. But just because they've tabled it, because in fact when we table it, we are not, it's against the rules actually to indicate whether you support it or not. Now, some MPs are better at acknowledging or sort of getting that in there without saying it outright. However, the fact of the matter is there's many petitions, many different ways. So I've presented a number of petitions or tabled a number of them since I've been elected on behalf of mainly constituents within Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound, and that I don't necessarily agree with everything within that petition. I may agree with aspects of the respective petition. I've even had to table one for a former Canadian Forces member because he actually asked his MP and sent it to his MP to authorize it, and his MP refused to. So when she refused to do it, I actually decided I would, because it was on an issue that I've actually been out in the public in support of, and that's in support of our law-abiding firearms owners. And so it was a simple enough petition that wasn't asking upon much other than something that I made in a statement literally last January in the House, which was speaking that maybe it'd be a good idea for any parliamentarians that is introducing legislation or discussing legislation on Canadian firearms, that they've taken the Canadian firearm safety course, and the petition, I think if I remember correctly, was only asking that a debate actually occur around the idea of whether MPs should have the training or not. So it wasn't something real contentious in the least bit. It was just something asking for us to be better informed and better educated, which I think is a good thing for anybody on any issue. The more education and the more informed we are before we make decisions or vote on something, I think the better off all Canadians will be because of it.
That certainly is a different perspective on the role of petitions than we often think, because I think what it really is, it's a way of getting the attention of the House, not necessarily the government, but the House, to say, hey, this matters to me, and this matters to this many people, and whether it has an effect on legislation is another question, but at least you have a way of expressing yourself, and that's certainly something we should always remember for all of us.
100%, and I encourage any constituents, anybody listening to the show today, David, that they use the petition process within within the House of Commons because it's way, I think, more effective than many of the sort of advocacy petitions that and websites that exist out there that people can create fake emails for, or that are signed up by people across the world and globally, because there's no level of substantiation and on whether or not how accurate and representative some of these petitions are, just because 200,000 people signed it. Well, when half the email addresses are some pretty funny looking names, and there's no accountability or transparency of who's created them, versus when you sign up to a petition in Canada, there is a double check system. You have to provide an address, your name, although that's all stayed local, it's all kept confidential, but there's that level of certainty that who actually is speaking up, and it's Canadians speaking up as they make this their petition known to the Canadian parliamentarians. And as you said, it gets presented to the House, and it can call upon the House, but it really is a call to the government, because the government are the only ones that they can actually really do something about it. Although sometimes you can get, we do have opposition days where we can bring forth legislation if we want, and obviously private members' bills are something as well.
Okay, well, we're going to take a quick break, Alex, and we're going to come back and have further discussions. I wanted to come back to COVID-19, which is a topic on everyone's mind. I'm David Shearman. This is Politically Speaking. We'll be right back.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Merry Christmas, everyone, from me and mine to you and yours. I hope that this Christmas holiday season is warm and fuzzy and spectacular for you and your family.
Hi, I'm Lori Wilder, Director of Education for Blue Water District School Board. On behalf of my colleagues, I would like to wish our students, staff, families, and local communities the happiest of holidays and all the very best for a safe and successful new year. Remember to stay safe and follow the guidelines as you enjoy this festive season.
Hey everybody, it's Mark McKelvey from Owen Sound Attack Hockey and RTV Sports Wrap. I hope everybody is staying safe out there. And with the upcoming holiday season, I just want to wish you and all of your family and friends a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. Can't wait to have some great times in 2021.
Hi, I'm David Shearman, host of Politically Speaking. Join me for my next show, where my guest will be Alex Ruff, MP for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. Politically Speaking on Rogers TV.
The opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Hi, and welcome back to Politically Speaking. I'm David Shearman. My guest is Alex Ruff, the MP for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound, and we've been talking about things political and things House of Commons, things Ottawa, perhaps, and it's interesting stuff. Alex, welcome back.
Thanks again, David, for having me.
Now, Alex, one of the issues that has been that Mr. O'Toole has been very, very clear on has been asking the government about vaccine supplies, particularly in the last week or so. And you spoke on December 3rd about, when you referred very favorably to Major General Fortin about the logistics. But there is some concern, at least within at least if Mr. O'Toole is speaking about the supply of vaccine and some of those arrangements. Do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, so the biggest concern is just the transparency and openness with Canadians so that we can get rid of that uncertainty and that stress and anxiety that's existing right across the country. Canadians just want to know. You can make a plan, whether you're a small business, whether you're an individual, about what's going on and how do you deal with it. So that's all we were asking for. And in fact, we brought forth, when I spoke about it, as an Opposition Day motion, to have the government release their plan. This isn't about saying that, vaccine Y will be released on, January 2nd or January, 17th. This is about saying, here's how many doses that we have signed on, what the contracts say generically. And I can understand their concerns about some of the financial stuff, but although I'm a big believer that the government should be sharing all this information with Canadians, it's taxpayer dollars, and they should be providing that level of fidelity and transparency to Canadians. But the plan that we're seeking has nothing to do with the contracts themselves, other than how many have they signed for and what is their commitment to getting them released. So today or yesterday, I think we just heard some more details on Moderna, and that once that vaccine has been approved by Health Canada, that the distribution and rollout can happen within 48 hours, I believe is what the government was mentioning yesterday, which is great news. And that's all we're looking for from a plan, is that, vaccine X, upon approval within, 48 hours will be distributed to the following locations. We have 14 locations. More information keeps coming out almost on a daily basis. I think I heard in the news just today or earlier today that they're going to, move from the 14 distribution sites up to 70 plus across the country. And so it'll be interesting today, because the government has till today to release that plan by end of play today. That's what the motion called for. And again, anybody that thought we were pushing the government too hard on this should be reminded that the Liberals all voted for this motion. It passed unanimously in the House. So they agreed to it. They think it's a good idea. So hopefully they will keep their word and deliver on what they've acknowledged in the House of Commons that they will do in getting the plan out to Canadians, so that everybody can see and have some level of certainty, because I think that'll go a long way to reduce stress and anxiety amongst Canadians right across the country.
And while the distribution plan itself is a federal matter, the actual administration of the vaccine is a provincial matter. And it'll be interesting to see it. What it looks like, at least here in Ontario, is that healthcare workers are among the first to get the vaccine, so that at least they are protected. And but it still is going to take time. And we're still going to have to take the usual steps, the 3 W's of wearing a mask, washing our hands, and watching our distance. So but it's good to see, certainly. That's a good thing. Do you feel that our public leaders should perhaps set an example at some point and get the vaccination themselves, unless they have obvious medical issues?
That's a great question. I was listening to the radio, I think it was yesterday or the day before, and it was, I think, the leadership of one of the long-term care homes that was speaking about that exact issue, and they indicated that they were going to get it, to accept, because there is some level of trepidation or concern, because the vaccine approval process has been very much expedited from its normal timeline. A lot of times vaccines might take a decade to develop, and this has been obviously developed in less than a year. So some people may have concerns about the validity. Well, personally, I'd have no issues, right? I mean, I think the debate is more about where is it of most use and effectiveness. And if it's going to help reassure Canadians, I mean, I have no problem taking it. As a former military person, I've been vaccinated for pretty much everything under the sun more than once, and I treat my immunization book, better than my passport, because I do not want to necessarily get inundated with a number of shots ever again if I decide to travel. But I have complete confidence and faith in Health Canada and the vaccines that are coming forward, and so I'd have no issues taking it. But at the same time, I'm very comfortable that I'm young enough, I'm healthy enough that I shouldn't be the priority. The priority should be to those that are at the greatest risk. and at those that are working the front lines, and in fact, the people that have the greater propensity to transmit the virus. So even our frontline workers in grocery stores, I think, should be a higher priority than I personally. That being said, to answer your question, I have no problem showing the leadership, and if that's what Canadians are asking for, I mean, I have no problem getting the vaccine. I'd prefer not to get the virus.
The virus, Alex. But I share that opinion personally. I think that as someone in the public sphere, it's important that we do these things and we show that kind of leadership. And what I have said is that when I am eligible, not before, when I am eligible. And that means if grocery store clerks have to go ahead of me, no problem. And I'm reasonably healthy, but I will let them go first because they're the ones that protect the rest of us, particularly healthcare workers. So yeah, I think that's a very, very good point. I won't ask how sore your arms were after all those inoculations, but I suspect COVID will be nothing like those. Nothing. Let's move on to something else, Alex. One of the things that actually here in Owen Sound, there was a resolution that was passed, and a number of municipal councils across this riding was in support of private members' bill regarding the declaration of Emancipation Day as a day for as a recognized holiday in Canada, or a recognized day in Canada. It was a very eloquent speech, I thought, as well.
Well, thanks, David. As it was something I asked specifically to make sure I got the opportunity to speak as a private member's motion. Really only each party gets one speaker during the first hour of debate, and then they'll get another speaker normally in the second hour of debate on a private member's motion or bill. So I had to do a little bit of arm wrestling almost to ensure that I was the one that got an opportunity to speak to it. And it was only really my first formal sort of lengthy speech in the House since being elected. And at the same time, it was my first attempt to really speak with minimal notes, because technically, according to the rules that people would maybe not be aware of, is that actually all debate in the House is supposed to occur extemporaneously, i.e. with no notes. So now that's not really enforced, and most speakers don't, but this was an issue dear to my heart for a number of reasons. And I do actually encourage any listeners to please go watch my speech. Because it did come from my heart, and it meant so much for really two overriding reasons. One, my daughter is of color and mixed background, so of course this is something that I find, just so tragic about the history of the world, but in particular in North America, and the whole idea of slavery. To me, just doesn't make any sense. I mean, obviously, you can understand that the world was different in the past, but that doesn't make it any righter, I guess, although that's not a proper word. And so, and the second thing is our riding, as the village of Sydenham was known as the final terminal on the Underground Railway, that sort of last beacon of hope. And we have such rich history, and the Owen Sound Emancipation Festival is the longest ongoing festival tied to the emancipation efforts since 1862. So something that's been ongoing since before Canada even became a country, and it speaks to this great area. It speaks to the families. Matthew Green from the NDP spoke right after me, or two after me, during the debate. And his own family trees is related to the Green family here in our area. So it was just something that meant a lot. I think it means a lot. To correct you a little bit, it's not a holiday. It's to recognize it as a national day. So there is no cost to taxpayers or anything like this. This is just a way to recognize the efforts that those of African descent and Black people have made to our great nation, and they continue to make on a daily basis, and to help with that education process to make sure the best way to learn from the past is not to forget it and to continue to study it. So I consider myself so privileged and fortunate and honored to get that speaking slot to speak to it, and to represent the great efforts by so many of our residents across the riding, and which speaks to Grey Roots as well, and the museum and the efforts that they have done. So again, you'll never see me turn down the opportunity whenever I can get it to speak and represent the great efforts by constituents in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound.
Well, I have to say, too, as I read the speech, I noticed you gave some shout outs to some well-known residents of the community, including Ovid Jackson, a former member of the House of Commons, and Blaine Courtney, as well as some members of in your own profession, soldiers who you have worked with over the years, who had a real impact upon you. And I would say to anyone, do go and read the speech or watch it. It's an excellent speech, and I think that as you said, it's a personal issue. This one's personal for you. And that adds an additional dimension to almost anything. When we're passionate about something, it becomes an additional dimension for what we say publicly. So I certainly want to commend you for the speech. It's, as I say, it's well worth reading, and I would commend others to read it as well. So thank you for that. Thank you.
No
very
problem,
much.
David. But I encourage people to watch it. They can watch it either on my social media or on the House of Commons, ourcommons.ca/members. Search for Ruff, RUFF, and you can pull up any interjections that I've had in the House, and it's well set up to watch it on anything, on any issue, whether you can read the speech, the transcripts right online on Hansard, or you can watch the actual video clip from there.
Great. Now, I know that Remembrance Day has a very, very deep meaning for you. What was different this year about Remembrance Day?
A little bit, obviously, but not a lot at the same time. I was fortunate enough, and I will, and I've said this publicly before, you won't see me miss Remembrance Day in my hometown of Tara. I've been a member of that Legion longer than I was in the military, and it just means so much to me. And so the big difference was the crowds. Obviously, the crowds weren't there. There were still a few people from the public that were maintaining their distance and watching it there, but we shot it. The Legion shot it through Facebook, and so it was broadcasted live. So, and it was fun to read some of the commentary that was coming from the schools that were watching it, because normally the Aaron Terry Elementary School does come down and participate and watch the ceremony, but they were watching it through social media. But the more interesting ones were the ones actually coming from former residents of the area that were able to watch online and that they didn't. So this is something, even when ideally the pandemic will be over by next November, I guarantee you the Legion will continue to broadcast these live. It's a way to get it out there. So it's not, just Owen Sound that and I know Rogers did a great job of, I think, covering that, and CFOS and some of the other, I think, broadcasting stations covered the Owen Sound ceremony. But that was the big difference. I still did a few outreach programs that day, spoke about my military sort of service to the Rotary Club out of Brantford. Actually, had reached out to me. And later that day, I did a national sort of online interview with the forum, I think it's called, that had requested for me to talk. But I was able to do Holstein on the Sunday, and some of the other, although the weather was completely different from the Sunday prior to Remembrance Day, where it was almost shorts and t-shirt weather, to what ended up happening on Remembrance Day. But I've had a lot colder and more miserable days, although it was quite windy this Remembrance Day. But as you said, it's the most important day of the year for me. It means a lot to me. And the uniqueness, to give a shout out to the Tara branch, is when they do the honor roll, they do the honor roll, just not those that made the supreme sacrifice in the conflicts, but all those that have ever served from the area and that have passed on since. And so I think they're up to almost 500 names, and it takes a long time, and it's the longest portion of the ceremony. And it's the one part, as long as I'm a member of the Legion, will continue to advocate that not to take out. It's a little unique to the Tara Legion and the ceremony there, but it's something that I think resonates with so many families, because I think almost every Canadian has some connection to especially the First and Second World Wars through family members, because the First World War, we had over 10% of the population, or about 10% of the population serve in uniform at the time. So we have a rich history in Canadians stepping up when the call comes, and I think it's important we remember that.
Yes, very, very true. You're right. It was a very different, the transition between Sunday and Remembrance Day was very different. It was quite cold because I was at the Owen Sound service, participating in that. It was very different, very, very different this year. But I think you're absolutely right as well, that the use of, what shall I call it, localized broadcasting using Facebook or YouTube or whatever is going to broaden the reach of these Remembrance Day services and other events. You just never know what the possibilities are. And if that's one of the good things that's come out of COVID-19, perhaps we can look to that as at least some positive. What does the Christmas and winter hold for you? You're not back. You don't have to be back in the house until the end of January. Are you going to be in the riding at all over Christmas?
Yeah, no, I'll be in the riding the majority of the time over the break. That's the plan, and I'll spend some time. Obviously, I have my daughter. She's in school still, so once school's done, she's on her break. But then I'm back for the most part right through until the third week of January, until the House starts sitting and some work starts commencing again. Unless, of course, the Parliament gets reconvened, as we talked about very early in the program, due to emergency legislation, or if the government needs something to happen with medical assistance in dying. So that's the plan, is to be back in the riding the majority of the break.
Forward in the new session of Parliament after break, or the continuing session, looking forward?
Unfortunately, David, you're breaking up there a fair bit, but I think if I got the gist of your question correctly, you were asking what we see coming forward in the new year. There's a number of bills that have been introduced by the government. Bill C-12, which talks about net zero, I think is something that'll be debated and discussed at greater length, as well as some of the other legislation. But that's the privilege that the government has. They get to drive the agenda, and so we'll see how that plays out.
Alex, one of the other issues that I think is really important that is at both federal and provincial levels is the issue of rural broadband. Are we going to see any progress in Grey Bruce-Owen Sound?
I think so. And I'm hopeful, although hope's never a course of action in the military. It's not, you should make a solid plan. But I have noted, I've had my own meetings with Barrie Field and the SWIFT program, which is an excellent program the more you get into it, because it's not tied to a specific level of government nor a single provider. It's actually a very balanced program. And so having listened to it, I think it is going to start getting some ground and making some progress. But that being said, the more I dig into some of the programs that the government has brought forth, the more questions I actually have. Some of them, they're a little bit disjointed. There are multiple different sort of programs or departments or aspects that are running these things through the federal government. And I think some of it would be much better if they tidied that all up and brought a little bit of coherence to the plan, which is something that we've been advocating, or I've been advocating to since the spring, when we said, here's a bunch of ideas, and we made a proposal to the government that would help get that rural broadband out to all Canadians within a sort of an 18-month time frame, not the current decade plan. So when the speech from the throne happened after Parliament was recalled after prorogation, they have one line in there, one sentence, that they're going to accelerate their program. And when during that debate, I asked the question of one of the Liberal MPs that was speaking, I said, what do you mean by accelerate the program? Does that mean it's going to be going from 2030 to 2029? Are you speeding it up by a week or a month or a year or 10 years? And of course, the member didn't answer that question. However, they have, when they made an announcement just a couple of weeks ago tied to the Universal Broadband Fund, they did mention that their intent is to, I think, get 98% of Canadians by 2026. So that's a positive news that they are committing to moving their timeline up for the majority of Canadians by 4 years. But it's still too long. I mean, I remember, as I said, I was making that proposal and pushing from our party the 18-month plan, and I had constituents going, 18 months is too long. We need this tomorrow. So in the end, it's an issue that's not going to go away, and it's something that I'm committed to continuing to hold the government to account and doing everything in my power to get this delivered, because it's of vital importance to our riding and to all Canadians.
Yes, Alex, I know that I've talked to the Board of Education here on Politically Speaking, and it's critical for schools and for making sure that schools get the education and kids get the education they need, especially in this time of COVID. So keep pushing, because it's going to be absolutely essential going forward. Are there we got about a minute left. Anything else that you see happening in the next session of Parliament?
No, well, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, obviously, one of the biggest questions will be the actual budget. They haven't, the government has not issued, they've set a record now, I think, between budgets since they've put one out. So I think that'll be the biggest issue when we get recalled, and whether or not that, whether or not that's something that is supportable by the opposition or not. And if it's not, we could be to the polls, although all parties have come out very forthright saying that nobody wants an election right now, even those of us that are not necessarily fans of the current government. We recognize doing a federal election during a pandemic's not in the best interest of anybody. But I just think that the most important thing that all Canadians and all constituents need to be focused on right now goes back to what you talked about, is doing what we can to keep the pandemic in check, keep the spread and transmission of the virus down, do the little things that we've been doing, but remain optimistic. I'm positive and happy that 2021 is going to be a more fruitful, happier year than 2020 was. And so I encourage everybody to do that. I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a healthy and happy New Year.
Well, Alex, thank you for your time today, and we'll let you get on to your next event, and we'll be talking to you in the new year. I'm David Shearman. This is Politically Speaking. We'll talk again.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
Fun, casual, intimate, and personal chats with artists and creative folks in the LGBTQ plus community and friends, all on Season 7 of On the Couch.
Now you can own your favorite Disney movies with Ignite TV. Choose from Disney titles such as Marvel Studios' Avengers Endgame,